Hello and welcome to the Carousel podcast. Today I have with me Ryan Zickgraf, who is definitely the first leftist we've had on this pod. He is a journalist. He writes for Compact, which is a very cool magazine that definitely sort of in a horseshoe sense connects the extremes of the left and the right, perhaps. Post-left, you might say. You also write for Jacobin, which is definitely a left-wing publication. You have a very cool Substack called The Third Rail, and you have a history writing for the Chicago Reader and some other magazines. I have a history writing for the LA Weekly, so I think we probably have quite a bit of overlap. I found you because you wrote a very cool article in Compact about the NFL, which I was also simultaneously kind of obsessing over, which is all of the identity politics or wokeism in the NFL, the woke washing, which you call it in your article. So we'll get to that. But first of all, maybe we can just talk about history. So, hi, Ryan.
Hey, Isaac, how's it going?
It's good. It's good. Thank you for being here. So we were just chatting before we started about your history with the Reader. So the Reader is a weekly in Chicago, and for people who don't really understand, most big cities have one of these free weeklies. In LA, it's LA Weekly. In New York, it was the Village Voice, which I don't even know if that exists anymore. And in
It
Chicago,
does. It's just online only.
yeah, okay. And in Chicago, it was the Reader. And growing up, I grew up in Chicago. The Reader was like a total staple. You know, everybody. It was a very culturally strong publication. So, why did you leave the Reader, and what was your experiences working there?
Oh man. Okay, so I joined. Here's a funny story. I was working for Tom Steyer in San Francisco back in 2014, and I came back to Chicago, and I applied for a part-time social media job. And so I started just doing their Twitter posts and all that. And then I kind of came on full time. I was officially their social media editor. And I was there 3.5 years, and it was a wild ride, even that short time. Um, we were owned by the Chicago Sun-Times. The first, I guess, 3 years I was there, shared a building with them. And then there was a lot of chaos in 2018 in terms of, yeah, and I don't know how much we went the weeds here, but they had fired a friend of mine, the head editor Jake Malooly, while he was on his honeymoon, and they hired this Sun Times reporter to like take over, and he had an issue which many people considered racist. It was of JB Pritzker on top of a field, just like sitting on top of a field, a yard jockey, and black ink everywhere. And if you read the article, it was supposed to be that JB Pritzker was racist, but everyone just saw the imagery and saw that a white guy had commissioned it and said it was racist. So it created this like huge media controversy. And so there was this panic inside the Reader that, we're too white, we're too racist. And so, a lot of white people needed to go. And that editor only lasted 9 days. And so then, I mean, this is kind of hilarious, but I was doing social media from a cider summit that the Reader was sponsoring, and there was a press release about the editor being fired, and then so I retweeted it with the official Reader account saying "Ding dong, the witch is dead," and people went nuts. I got in trouble. I got suspended for a couple days, and the editor of the Sun Times was saying, you threatened our business, we could be sued, and we don't have the money to cover this. And not only that, but there was actually an editor that edited the piece and he put the tags, like the SEO tags, to say like racist, fascist. And so they took that also as, as an attack. So right after that, so the publisher of the Sun-Times said that, we can't get more diverse because we're not hiring. And the only way that we're going to get more diverse is if there's turnover. And so what happens the next day? Someone accuses me of sexual harassment.
Oh my God. Whoa.
Yeah. So then that was, sort of peak Me Too. So I got suspended. And then while under an investigation, the investigation didn't turn up anything, of course. And so I go back to work, but things were just so weird and awkward. Now,
was it just totally unfounded? Did you like ask the girl out or something?
No, they wouldn't tell me who it was from.
Oh.
And they couched it in these weird terms saying that you made a woman feel uncomfortable. I mean, that could be almost anything.
Yeah, literally anything. That could be absolutely anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So a few days later, they said, we investigated it and turned up nothing. You can come back to work. And that was that. But nobody, people at work just like treated me like, they just wouldn't even look me in the eye anymore. It was weird. And then meanwhile, again, there was new management that came in, the owner of the Windy City Times, and she brought in Anne Elizabeth Moore, who again was this Gen X punk. She used to write for Punk Planet. She became, super woke, came in like day one saying, we need more identity stuff. We need more on disabled people. We want to do more puppet content because puppetry was a personal interest of her. And it was like
in Chicago, though, there is a lot of puppet shit because like there's weird theater in Chicago. So actually growing up, I remember there was all kinds of puppet shit all the time. What was it called? Like
the puppet
Moon or something Moon, Red Moon. There was like a bunch of shit like that.
Yeah, there was also that puppet cart up in like Andersonville.
Yeah.
That would do like live puppet shows.
Yeah, a lot of puppet shit happening in Chicago because it's all this like B grade theater, so it's all these like weird theater people. I grew up like in that. My parents are theater people. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
So again, Anne Elizabeth Moore came in with this whole like, we're moving to all woke all the time. We're not going to put white guys on the cover of the Reader anymore. These theater plays, if it's about a certain identity group, only members of that identity group will be able to review it. And a lot of people chafed under that, including a designer who was like, I think it's actually racist that you're saying we can't have white guys on the cover anymore. And I think it's offensive. And so, yeah, a lot of the white guys ended up quitting, including myself.
Oh, okay. So you quit. You were just like, I'm done with this.
Yeah, because she also demoted me. She said that I couldn't write anymore because I was doing social media, but I was also blogging part-time. And then she's like, nope, no more. On day one, when she came in, she was like, no more blogging for you, just social media.
You were blogging on the Reader, or you were blogging personally? Okay, you were blogging for the Reader. I mean, you were like, no, you have to just. Wow.
Yeah.
Man, you hear this story so many times. So what ended up all happening? Did the House of Cards collapse eventually? That's kind of what happened to LA Weekly, but so same as woke takeover and then it collapsed.
Yeah. I mean, they still exist, but almost everyone that was there only 4 years ago are totally gone. And there's been a bunch of management changes since then. I think they've had 3 editors-in-chief since then. And the thing is with that, when people like myself quit, it just became even more woke and sort of their own bubble. And it was like, well, number one, they started getting writers and freelancers that didn't have much experience, but they were of a certain identity group, marginalized peoples, and the quality of the content went down a lot. And then a lot of the pieces were like about arts groups or nonprofits that were experiencing microaggressions and were fighting back against management, or like grad students. So much of the content was like, oh, we're being oppressed at the Museum of Contemporary Art, and here is the workers' take. So they just went full-fledged woke, and the problem is, I mean, the funny thing is, I've actually written about this a little bit, is that the thing about the Reader is that this history of sort of the 60s counterculture, and for most of the last 40 years they were sort of anti-authoritarian. They were very this is where you're going to read about sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
And that has changed. It's more about what's going on in activist circles, these pet PMC projects, where they're all interrogating whiteness and I don't know, yelling at each other all the time. And it's become very authoritarian and very against a lot of free speech.
Right.
And again, some of what they did, like, I mentioned that this news editor that just left, Jim Daly, had written this expose on Perry Abbasi and his tweets. And it just strikes me that the Reader of 40 years ago would have published a piece on this, just like, all but random Twitter shit poster and about, decrying all his content as racist. That just wouldn't have happened. And so it's just like, alternative weeklies don't really make sense anymore. What are they an alternative to?
Right. Exactly. Right. They're just a little sister to the whole other thing. I mean, maybe they're a little more lefty, as you're saying. Maybe they're actually talking about labor abuses or something. But do you follow Perry? I don't really know too much about him. I just started following him because of all that, honestly. So, but do you know anything about him?
Same.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I mean, I know that the Fraternal Order of Police is like the police union, and then there a lot of leftists and a lot of activists have fought against them, even though it is a bit of a contradiction because they are a union, but they're a police union. They're protecting cops, and so he was already kind of associated with the bad guys. But I think, had it not been for that article, I mean, I noticed that his Twitter following went up like 5,000 followers since the article came out. So really it backfired.
Right. I don't even know what his beat is. I don't really understand, so I can't really speak about it, but I've seen him around, so it's funny that they went after him. Were they what is his actual job? Do you know?
I think he's running for legal counselor for the police board or something.
I see. Okay. So some job like that. Okay.
Yeah. It's a very minor position.
Yeah. Wow. So after all this and this kind of collapse of the Reader, you then moved to Atlanta.
No. Journalism is a bad game these days, and I married a woman who had a better career in academia, so I followed her to Mobile, Alabama for a couple of years. She was a psychology professor, and then I followed her. She got a job at Emory, so I followed her here to Atlanta. Not for my career.
Yeah, it's for hers. No, hey, so we got to do these days. Us guys who are outspoken, we got to attach ourselves to a woman who is less cancelable than we are.
Exactly.
I see that repeated. My wife, unfortunately, is in the art world, though, so it's not enough to, Okay, cool. Yeah, so in Atlanta, and then Mobile. Wow, what was Mobile like?
It was interesting. I mean, Mobile is a city that, I've lived in a lot of places that are very gentrified, including Atlanta, and Mobile definitely isn't. And it does feel like it's in a bit of a time capsule. It does feel like at least 10 to 20 years behind. And the racial politics are crazy there. And I just came across, I wrote a piece for Jacobin about the segregated Mardi Gras. They just had Mardi Gras. Fat Tuesday is tomorrow, actually. But they had this thing yesterday called Joe Cane Day. And on Joe Cane Day, Joe Cane, sorry, again, this is getting into the weeds. He is the father of modern Mardi Gras in Mobile. He kind of brought it back after the Civil War. But the part that doesn't really get talked about much is that he was a Confederate sympathizer who did this march on Mardi Gras where he dressed up as an Indian, like a Cherokee, and brought this band of Cherokees with him. And he said he was this Cherokee chief that had beaten the Union Army. And he said that the Cherokees were the only people to actually beat the Union. So it was sort of a celebration of the Confederacy after the Confederacy had lost. But they still dress like white guys dress in, the headdresses and the feathers. This happened yesterday, and growing up in a very PC part of Atlanta, it's like jarring to see.
Yeah, totally. No, I went to law school at Tulane Law. So I experienced a little bit of that down in New Orleans. And you see the real, like, I think that's the first time I ever.
It's like a bit of a news.
It's a what? It's a news hole.
Yeah, because like I was there on New Year's Eve. There was a mass shooting there and nobody heard about it. It's just like Alabama has so little media.
Yeah.
There's no weekly daily paper for an area of about 450,000 people. It's just like news doesn't escape there.
Yeah. It's a weird part. So I used to always drive to like the Florida Panhandle from New Orleans. So I'd pass through Biloxi, which is like the first city you pass through going east, and then you pass through Mobile. And I always remember Mobile, like, there's a couple little buildings in the downtown, and you're just like, outside of the Bob Dylan song, you're just like, what is going on here? Like I always wanted to know, like, what would happen if I like got out of the car and like went and hung out in Mobile? It's like I never actually did, but I was always wondering, because there's a little downtown area, and like, I mean, it's a lot of oil, probably.
There's a lot of extraction industries around for sure, including. Did you follow anything about Africa Town and the Clotilde, the slave ship that they found a few years ago?
No. What was that?
So Africa Town is this place where these slaves settled after they were set free. It was the last slave ship to come to America. And, this guy, Captain Meager, was smuggling them in, but to sell to some sort of rogue slave traders. But they got caught, set free by the Union. And so they just basically built their own town north of Mobile. And oh man, it's one of the bleakest places in America I've ever been to.
Oh wow.
Just extreme poverty. And there's factories everywhere because it's on the bay. There is lumber, oil, chemicals everywhere, and cancer rates are super high there. And that's one of the things so in 2018, they did an expedition to find the slave ship, which had never been found, and they found it. And so the city's been working with these organizations to do like a tourist area. And so this summer, an Africa Town heritage house and museum is opening. But people are gonna like walk around the town and be like, where the hell am I? There is just nothing there.
Wow. That sounds like a good story. Is that anywhere near the Blues Highway? Like what's the Delta Highway 85 or something? 80.
I'm not sure. That might be more Mississippi.
Yeah, I think that's further west. Yeah, that's one of my biggest regrets from being down there, was not ever doing that blues highway that like goes up to Memphis.
I mean, it's funny that I am not somebody who wrote a lot about racism, but down there it was hard to avoid. I mean, so I've written a lot of pieces my time in Alabama about the racial politics, because it's still pretty crazy there.
Yeah. I think, like, coming from where I came from, I never actually even the only time I've ever experienced actual like white on black racism, like the real thing, was in New Orleans. That was the only time I've actually like really seen it. I mean, I also come from Evanston, Illinois, which is, like
Yeah.
the only place in America that has reparations, like literally. So I come from the total opposite. But it was crazy to actually, for a northerner like me, to see like real racism, like not like projected racism, but like the true thing. It really does exist there. And it's very like shocking when you really see it, because it's just so like unexpected.
Yeah, and you can even see it when you're hanging out at Mardi Gras at the parades. There's like a black section of the parades and there's a white section of the parades. And you just walk a block and it looks completely different. And I know that, in most cities there's some sort of informal segregation and it's kind of patchwork.
Yeah.
But in Mobile, it's just way more pronounced.
Totally. And it's the same thing in New Orleans. Like, there's no attempt. Like, it's just like everybody's like, nope, like you stay over there, we stay over here, like don't mix. I one time brought a black friend that I grew up with to a party during Mardi Gras, and it was actually two kids I grew up with, one of whom gets reparations now in Evanston, literally. But we went down there and we went to a party, and they were dressed kind of like, not ghetto, but like kind of like chains and stuff. And we went to a Mardi Gras party, and the Mardi Gras party was in a big house uptown New Orleans, so like in the nice area. And it was all kids in like, vented like Bass Pro Shops gear, like, like Braden, like the white people down there who are like, in their own way, very trashy. And but like, kind of wealthy. And we went in there and it was like the music stopped and we got kicked out because I was with these two black guys. It was unbelievable. And I like got really mad. I was like, what the fuck? Like, we're here with friends. We're not just walking in off the street. And they're like, yeah, sorry, there's like too many people here. And I was like, whoa, that is really crazy. Like, I've never experienced actual like real racism like that before. And it was very shocking.
Yeah. Living Gulf Coast is sort of its own little region, and the politics are just very different.
Yeah. And like you said, a news hole. It's like a little bit like you can't. It's all going on without anybody really knowing what's happening down there.
Yeah, I was actually one thing I didn't mention is I was sort of an Alabama correspondent for the Washington Post.
Oh, yeah.
And I would pitch things to them and never got anything, like nothing, even though like I had a really good investigation I pitched that still hasn't been done about this guy who tried to basically bribe a city councilman for like $100,000 to throw the election. Nobody was interested. Nobody gives a shit. It's so crazy.
Yeah, that reminds me. Are you a New Yorker reader?
I'll read an article once in a while.
They just published a piece about like Eric Adams, who's the mayor of New York, his like corrupt buddy, who's like one of these like street preacher kind of guys who drives a Rolls Royce.
Oh, yeah. I listened to a podcast about that a while back. Yeah, this guy sounded like a character.
Yeah. And it's like, and Adams defends him, even though he's like been in jail many times and like obviously is like a totally corrupt guy. And I thought that was, it was nice that the New Yorker did that amid surely calls of racism that they were getting from everybody. But anyway, I think that this brings us to before we talk about the NFL, this brings us to probably the larger point that you and I can talk about, which is, so as a leftist, where are you seeing, all these things that you're talking about they're clearly identity issues. So, like, where are you at with all this stuff, right? Like, are you thinking that, I guess what I want to know is like, the takeover of the reader, for example.
Yeah.
Why is that happening? And what does that have to do with, because that's happening under the banner of leftism, right? Is it?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, I mean, if you want to get into the idea of, you know, the whole Bernie brigade, it has kind of fallen apart, but there used to be sort of two ideological poles. I mean, within sort of democratic socialism or Bernie leftism, or for whatever you want to call it, with identitarianism versus a more class-based approach.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely more on the class-based approach. I, in fact, used to be in the DSA Unity Caucus, which was accused of being racist, but that was, you know, a part of the DSA that's like, we need to unite, think of ourselves as workers and work together to get stuff like Medicare for all passed, and that we're obsessing too much with identity. So
yeah, so I had a little brief stint as a leftist. I voted for Bernie both times, so I'm not like some hard.
same. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not totally. I mean, now I am, but economically speaking, I'm not like a hyper libertarian. Even I think that I just got so disgusted with the identity politics that it just pushed me all the way. But I went to a DSA meeting, and it was like a tenants' rights meeting, and here in LA, this was many years ago, obviously, and because I was like, hey, maybe I should get involved. I also, oh, this is funny. I wrote a piece like naming and shaming the worst landlords in LA for Curbed, and the second it came out, 5 of them threatened to sue, and they pulled down the piece.
Wow.
And I know you can still find it outside of you can still find it on like archive, but anyway, so I was all mad and angry and like fuck the landlords, and I was definitely in that type of vein, but especially in LA, the landlords are just the absolute worst. So I went to this DSA meeting, and the entire meeting was just subsumed by identity. We did not spend 1 second talking about economics, about organizing. It was all like, what language do you speak? What are your pronouns? Let's like put on the headphones and make sure that every language is on the headphones. And, an hour and a half later, it was like the meeting was over. And that was kind of where I was like, okay, this is just totally, just not, I don't know if it's a good use of time. It just seemed to me like this was not the right approach. So I guess like, is the way that you see it that identity has just kind of gone too far within leftism, or do you think that identity is used by the corporatocracy, whatever, intentionally to divide and conquer?
Maybe a little both. I mean, it's funny. I don't know how much you know about my history with Compact, and I helped found a publication called The Bellows.
Yeah, I was listening to you on a podcast talk about that a little bit, but yeah, I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, and so like part of my reason for starting that publication in the first place was that I felt like a lot of leftist movements and a lot of leftist media had trouble speaking out against the excesses of the identitarian camp, but I didn't want what a lot of people call anti-wokeness to like define the political project, because my stance this whole time has never been to pretend that racism and sexism and things like that don't exist and aren't a problem, but it does get way over emphasized, and it obscures the greater class project. And trying to find that right balance, I don't think I have the answer to that, but it's trying to find a middle point, because I feel like with a lot of the stuff, identity, you're either for it or you're against it. And the internet tends to reward extremes. So how do you negotiate that?
Well, so how do you negotiate to me, it's just like, who are the people right now that are the labor people, right? Because you write a lot about labor. So in your NFL article, your lens to seeing that is look at all the literally on the field, it says end racism. We have end racism written on the field. But what is Goodell, the guy who runs the NFL? What is he actually doing? He's extending the season. So it's a kind of perfect lens for seeing the truth about labor versus identity, because he's painting it with all this lip service. Every corporation is completely on board with this because it doesn't actually, there's no sacrifice, right? And did you see the graph of like the mentions of racisms in the media after Occupy Wall Street? It's like it dips, and then after Occupy Wall Street, like 2011, the number of like mentions of racism in the media is like skyrockets. Which I view as, people are like, oh, come on, it's not that simple. I view that as corporate PR dollars dormant, sitting there waiting to be used. When Occupy Wall Street happens, they get triggered. And then they're like, what do? We sponsor the NAACP. And it becomes this whole cloudy race thing because it's perfect divide and conquer. So in the NFL context, you're saying that they do this identity stuff to kind of, I don't know if it's to cover it, but it's
or at least to appease a group of people. I mean, there's sort of been a moral panic about these identity issues for years, and corporations feel like they have to respond because a lot of the professional managerial class is saying we have to do something. Well, to allow organized labor to operate more freely, it would cost your company money and time, but to put Black Lives Matters in your Instagram account or on the field doesn't really cost you a thing, and there's no policy in that. It cracks me up. I live a few blocks from this Black church, and the house next to him has a sign that said white silence is violence and Black Lives Matters and all this, every sign imaginable. Well, there's a Black guy that's been sleeping right next to him on the ground. He's like a homeless guy. And it's just funny walking by, seeing a homeless guy, and then the sign that, it is so disconnected. Besides, this vague, we're going to defund the police. Other than that, so much of this identity stuff is just about recognition. It's about celebrating diversity, whatever the fuck that means. And so, they can continue to do what they want to do while just making these vague gestures towards social change.
Right. Well, and look at California. It's every year it's gotten more progressive. It's gotten more unequal. And so it just kind of raises the question, isn't this all, I mean, neoliberalism is leftism in a way, right? So it's like,
in a way, okay, go on.
I mean, neoliberal, it's liberalism. I mean, it's certainly about individual rights, right? I mean, it's like they want you to, the neoliberal project wants your identity to be the things that you click on in your home by yourself, and that identity should be whatever you want it to be, right? And even better if you spend a lot of money on it. Even better if your identity means that you work really hard, all day for a corporation, and then spend all your money on drugs or on whatever, like pharmaceuticals, whatever it is. And that's really what they want people to be. The neoliberal kind of like vision is that. So when I'm looking at the world, when I'm looking at like the people who are part of that versus the people who are not part of that, I think for me, it's inevitable that the lower class of today, or the working class of today, aren't they pretty much Trump supporters? I mean, like, isn't that basically who is the corpus of what used to be leftism today?
Well, first of all, I would push back a little bit on saying that these are all neoliberal tendencies. I would say a lot of it's like individualism, something that is, been in the American DNA for a
That's
long
true.
time.
Yeah, very true.
And I would also say, as our lives have become more atomized, and I feel like there's been a death of localism
Yeah.
for the past two generations, and that where people used to be like, okay, I identify with this part of Chicago or a Chicagoan or something like that. Um, as we've all, become the same person online, well, how do you celebrate your own uniqueness and how do you celebrate your identity? Well, oh, I'm the same. Everybody with black skin or white skin or is gay, we all are a community. We all, even though I don't know who you are, and you may live 3,000 miles away, we have this commonality. We're part of a community, even though if you look at what actually would make a community, it really makes no sense. But it's the way that we've adapted to all of these cultural and societal changes.
Right. And no, totally. And it's like death of localism. But so do you not see the death of localism as like a global liberal project?
I don't know if I don't know if I call it a liberal project. I think a lot of it, is sort of just uh, a reflection of the changes in production in terms of things going from we live in a post-industrial society, and the knowledge economy is what really drives America, and that happens through the internet. That happens in places where we're seeing each other less and less. You and I have never met. We're talking on this device. Well, the effect of sort of the flattening of the way we interact and the way we work has made it so that we look for a sense of identity and
Yeah.
belonging in whatever we can find. And I think that it's just identifying as LGBTQ or a white supremacist or whatever is just like a way to feel like you are grounded in something or a part of a group, because otherwise we're very individualized.
But why does then the global regime hate nationalism but love blackness or gayness?
Well, I mean, I think that
Or why does it hate whiteness?
why does it hate whiteness? I mean, so I think that and partly it's for good reasons. This is partly because um, there has been a history of white supremacy, in the West and throughout the world. There has been a history of women and gay people being oppressed, and so there's been such a disruption in our society, like politically, and so with the internet and sort of the loosening of information, people are learning more about the history of this country and country imperialism. And part of it is a justified reaction to it. But instead of trying to figure out a better way to organize society, it's just sort of like an overcorrection and like kind of a Quentin Tarantino universe where it's all about getting revenges for injustices of the past, and
Yeah.
so you kick someone's ass because they represent that the oppressors. I mean, that's sort of what a lot of liberalism is these days, is trying to punch up, so to speak, at what they view as the oppressor.
Right. Well, and I
I don't know
think
if
it's
that
a
makes
lot
sense.
because I think the reason for that is because there's an absence of um roots. So there's no roots to help you identify this is me, this is who I am, this is my historical fight. these are my historical enemies, or these are my historical friends, and like this is who I am. So they have to create, as you say, this great Tarantino kind of alternate history where we have these Voldemort bad guys that are created, and everybody has to agree that, like, oh yeah, no, this guy was evil, this guy was evil. And what is the religion of the left? Or, it's, again, I think what's great about talking to you is so many people like me, when we say the left, we actually don't mean the left. Like, we don't
Yes.
mean you, we don't mean people like you. We mean this global corporate monster, this Leviathan that is, outsourced all the jobs, wants endless free labor from immigration. We're talking about this corporate neoliberal thing, which is not really leftist at all. But that thing has to have a religion of some kind, right? I mean, it has to have some kind of people are dumb, people are very stupid, and they need things to cling to of good and evil. And that's why you hear this refrain over and over again of right side of history, because that's like all they have. They have no roots. They have no, like, oh, these are our people, we want to promote our people. All they have is this notion of, well, the purpose of my life is to be on the right side of history.
Yeah, and I think that, as a leftist, who would we want to target is rich people, and not just people, systems that create the vast inequality that keeps on getting worse, instead of whiteness, which is something vague and isn't tied to a single institution. And like, what does it mean to like kill whiteness? I don't know what that means, but to change institutions and to redistribute wealth is something substantial and something that we can actually do. So yeah, of course, these corporations and these political leaders, like, oh yeah, let's go after whiteness, because what is that going to change in terms of the status quo, except for in the NFL, having these special ceremonies or commercials where there's more people of marginalized identities than ever.
So tell us a little bit about your NFL piece. It's titled "This is not your grandfather's NFL."
Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't my title idea, but
this is for Compact. So yeah, tell us about your
yeah.
thesis and why you decided to write that.
So funny enough, I used to be a sports writer. In fact,
really? Oh, that's cool.
Do you remember the Chicago Tribune had this special edition called the Red Eye?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yes, I picked. It was the free one in the morning, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that was great.
I used to be their fantasy sports writer.
Oh, cool, man. That's awesome.
I was Dr. Fantasy, believe it or not.
Oh, I think I remember that. I used to always pick those things up. I always was carrying those around. Yeah.
Yeah, I also used to write like tech and gaming stuff for them. I used to be like their video game reviewer.
Oh, cool.
But anyway, I used to pay attention to the NFL a lot, and then I got married, I got older. My wife isn't into sports, and so I kind of fell off the wagon the last few years. But this year, she's from Philly. I've spent a lot of time in Philly, and I kind of got into it with the Eagles. And then because I'd been out of it for a few years, I feel like last I was paying attention, we'd had all of this fight during the Trump years on the NFL. Like, Trump made it a big culture war issue, that basically the NFL was getting too lib, and that Colin Kaepernick was out of control and he needs to respect the flag. And, a lot of liberals were happy to play along with that. And so there was this huge fight over it. And at the time, the NFL was still sticking to its pretty conservative guns, or at least like apolitical, like, we're going to kind of stay out of it, and we're just going to have this silent thing where Colin Kaepernick is not going to get picked up by any NFL team. And then, I check in a few years later, and things have changed so much that it really struck me. And that was part of the reason for this piece.
So how have they changed?
So I think the most shocking thing to me was the sports gambling thing. And that, I feel like that really snuck up on me, because, when I grew up, and I'm an old dude, but I remember when Pete Rose got banned from baseball for gambling on his own team. But like, it was this, code in professional sports that you don't gamble whatsoever. And, I mentioned this in this piece, but there was talk for a long time about an NFL team eventually coming to Las Vegas, but they're like, that is where, sports gambling goes on. We don't even want to be associated with that. So they held up a team going to Las Vegas for decades. But, after this, what was it, 2017, 2018
Yeah, I think you
ruling,
say
just sort of,
Murphy versus NCAA 2017.
yeah, it just opened the floodgates. And I guess it was maybe a little bit after we really liberalized marijuana laws. It was like sports gambling, boom. It was just like a light switch, and it's really opened up. And the NFL, like, in a few years, it's like a feature of their broadcast. I mean, because part of the deal with them is that young people don't care much about professional sports anymore. They're watching video games. They're just, sifting through their TikTok feeds all day. And so professional sports viewership is declining. Well, what's a way to get people more interested? Have their money involved, have a chance of winning. So to me, I think part of it is strategic for them because they're trying to, cultivate this audience who's addicted to sports gambling.
So do you know what that case was? Do you know why it's NCAA or anything about that?
I'd have to look. I'd have to have a refresher. I can't think of it offhand.
I should have looked it up beforehand. But
the New York Times did a really good series on this whole thing. They did I want to say a 3-part series late last year, kind of describing how a lot of these dominoes fell. Like Chris Christie is involved. All of this big money lobbying coming in from all of these gambling interests. There's a piece, honestly, I want to write, and I might write it for Jacobin, about Bally's. The casino chain plus, I guess, fitness.
Is that the same? I didn't realize that was the same thing. But I remember people used to always talk about Bally's in Vegas, but is that even still there?
Yeah, I believe so. And they're opening a casino in Chicago here in the next couple of years. And it's just a huge turnaround there too, because Bally's was sort of outlaw. It was associated with the mob, and they were kind of banned in Chicago. And so for them, all of a sudden, 50 years later, to be opening a casino is quite a change. So that's a piece I want to write in the future.
So you're saying that these gambling interests have really influenced the NFL?
Yes. There's been a lot of lobbying. And also, I think it's partly a way to get young people interested in sports again, in spectator sports, because there's all this content, all these distractions, and the NFL at the end of the day is just another piece of content, that fights for people's eyeballs. So opening up gambling is just a way to get people invested in caring about games again.
Yeah, then there's right. They were hemorrhaging. I'm in advertising. I did a campaign for the NFL that was all about, they were hemorrhaging their younger fans. Their younger fans love fantasy, but they don't watch the games. So maybe this is a big way to get those people back involved.
Yeah, it's a real crisis, especially in baseball and hockey. No one under 40 is watching that.
Yeah. So, but then you also have a lot of this stuff in here. I mean, I think this was the most noticeable part is, so the gambling is a very good point. Now the Raiders are an NFL team, which you were saying really was a big no-no. They were trying to avoid that. And then now suddenly that exists.
Yep.
Because it's in Vegas.
And in New Orleans, they have the Caesars Dome, the Caesars Palace.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, right. And so, but a lot of the piece is also about so you have this passage here where you're talking about Goodell. You're saying he heard the butcher knives unsheathing and did what most highly paid CEOs do. He bowed to market forces. During the George Floyd protests of 2020, many of the game stars supported the demonstrations on social media. Soon the league launched a $250 million campaign with the stated goal of ending racism, a slogan that has been stamped on the back of players' helmets and in the end zones. But the NFL's showy insistence that Black Lives Matter conflicts with its 2021 labor agreement that extended the regular season to 17 games to raise more revenue over the objections of many players who had put themselves at increased injury risk. Shit dumb as hell, tweeted Saints running back Alvin Kamara. The result has been jarring. And then you say that injuries are up, and which of course they are. And you talk about DeMar Hamlin for a second. So I'm a little confused there because you're saying that, and this is like actually a big issue that I take with a lot of this discourse. You're saying that the race stuff is Goodell bowing to market forces. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
You're saying he bowed to market forces.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that a lot of the old guard of, the NFL's core audience had been, a lot of white conservative suburbanites. In fact, in Chicago, the Bears just bought land in Arlington Heights, like a suburb, and they're moving the Bears, and that follows. There's more teams doing that. I mean, here in Atlanta, the Braves moved to the suburbs.
Yeah, and in
because
San Francisco, they moved the Niners to.
Yep.
Although I will say, Soldier Field sucks. I was just there.
I used to live near it, and I love the history, and I love the I like it, but it's definitely it definitely is a bit ragged.
It's cool inside. I mean, the columns thing is cool, but getting there is like, it might as well be in the suburbs because it's impossible.
Well, I used to walk.
Yeah, well,
so
you're
not
like
a problem for me.
0.1% of people who can walk there, but yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Shit, what was I saying?
No, you were saying they're moving a lot of the stadiums to the suburbs.
Oh, right, because that is a lot of the core of like the NFL's most hardcore fans. I mean, I used to go to Bears tailgates, and almost everybody would be from the suburbs. Like a lot of middle-aged, white guys from the exurbs. Yeah. And so a lot of teams, I mean, partly because of the real estate costs and also because they can extract money from these suburbs to help build them stadiums, because a lot of cities have wised up to it kind of being a scam to use all this public money for stadiums. So that's part of it. But I think also part of it is that it was seen as like their core market. But a lot of corporations are trying to market to middle class and upper middle class people with money, and a lot of this group cares about these certain racial politics or wokeness, and there's this idea that we want to reach this diverse group. We want to reach these growing groups of Latinos and Black people and other demographic groups. So it's sort of an attempt to, expand their shrinking audience.
Yeah, see, like that's the part that is not so woke washing, as you're saying, is I think a lot of people rock themselves, not you, but some people tell themselves that, it's about capitalism. The reason why we see woke everything suddenly is a capitalist reason, right? And NFL is having this campaign that says football is gay, which is done by 72 and Sunny, which is an agency that I actually used to work for. But that's not why. They're not doing it. The woke takeover of advertising is not because they think it's going to make them more money, right? There's 100 million Trump supporters in the country. 100 million. I mean, like, if they're actually sitting there drawing out, if they're really like, if we do the numbers here and here and here, like we have this idea that inside these agencies or inside these marketing organizations, they're like doing the numbers and they're like, if we can get this many more Latinos, it doesn't matter if we alienate 100 million Trump supporters, right?
Okay, but what's the average? what's the average income of Trump supporters compared to Biden supporters?
I don't know, but I'm saying
Because
this calculus is not what's actually happening. Nobody's like sitting there inside these companies being like, oh, well, if we completely embrace transgenderism, which is deeply unpopular with everybody, then we're gonna make more money. That's not why. That's just not actually happening. They, like inside the company, they're not. There's no like accountant who's like crunching those numbers.
well, yeah, I'm not saying it's like necessarily just like accounting, but they are trying to reach, if you worked in advertising, I mean, it's not just reaching a certain demographic of age, it's also of a certain income. And a lot of this movement is among the middle classes and upper middle classes. Yeah, I mean, a lot of Trump supporters are working class and don't have a lot of money, where a lot of advertiser, which is a lot of what this programming is built on, is chasing a very elite demographic most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely. I don't think they're chasing it, right? I think that they are it. I mean, that's what it is. It's the systems that create this stuff are completely dominated by overeducated, liberal people who are, I've never met so many hardcore communists than I have in advertising. And it's all really, really rich people who are, make tons of money. These hype dad type people who are like dedicated communists, the DSA people, really excited about the death of global capitalism, even though they are literally like making global capitalism. So there's this weird hypocrisy. I mean, I think.
So let me say this. I don't think. I think it's a market calculation for them. Now, does it make sense to agree with that logic? Is it really going to make them more money? I don't think so, but that is the belief that has infected so many minds. That's what I'm saying. I don't think
it's not. I wish that was true. And so many people say this, but if that were true, right, if what you're saying is true, you wouldn't see the exact same woke takeover of every Netflix movie, of every Hollywood movie, of every sports event, the tennis, every single one of these companies, every single one of these sports, they're all making the exact same decision at the same time. Hollywood is making the decision. It's not like one. Certainly, if there was a market calculation, one major company would sit down and they would say, well, every other major company is going after the left, so why don't we go after the right? But none of them are doing that. Not one big giant, corporation is doing that. So it's not a capitalist thing. They're not trying to like capture the women of Brooklyn. You know what I mean? Like the women of Brooklyn don't watch football. Yeah.
I would push back on that some. I mean, like I remember this was something that I covered for the Red Eye. I remember when I was a sports columnist there, NASCAR reached out, and NASCAR saw declining ratings, and they're like, we're not really going after city people, so we're going to try. And they sent a limo out to pick me up from downtown Chicago and bring me all the way out to, past Joliet, an hour and 15 minutes away. And they tried to do things to try to attract an urban market. And it was, I think, kind of stupid. But it was something that these marketing executives had told themselves that we have to find some group of people that isn't watching NASCAR. And, they also hired some people to make a
Uh-oh, you froze.
Latino watching NASCAR. I'm not saying that it was smart or effective, but that was the idea.
No, look,
So
there's always campaigns to try and attract new people to a given sport, right? That's always the case. But that's not why the NFL is out there saying football is gay. They're not like trying to attract the gay population. Like that.
Well, they're not attracting the gay population, but they're attracting the population that thinks talking, acceptance of gay people is like a paramount thing to proclaim, like virtue signaling people. They want to get those people.
Look at what happened with Top Gun, right? There is no economic genuine. And look, I've been in these companies. Nobody is sitting there. I've been in a million of these meetings. Nobody is sitting there saying, look, here's the numbers. We need to really completely alienate every single Trump supporter, which is hundreds of millions of people, and simultaneously alienate all of those people and go after this effete liberal audience. Like, nobody's actually saying that inside these companies. And I think that if it genuinely was a economic calculation, you would have companies taking all kinds of different approaches, but every single global corporation is taking the same exact approach. They're all waving the rainbow flag. They're all saying gay stuff. They're all marching leftward endlessly, right? So
they're marching left endlessly on culture war issues.
Only on culture stuff, exactly. Only while simultaneously marching totally rightward on economic stuff, as you pointed out so well, right? And so I think it's just divide and conquer. I mean, there's a few things going on. One thing is truly the people making these things have been very strangely warped, and they're like super overeducated. And I think they do.
It's social media.
Yeah,
I think social media is a huge part of it.
I think they do have a little bit of what you're talking about, of like, they're kind of true believers, and they're people who have gone up the ranks because they're true believers. But what I see inside these companies is the target of a global corporation now isn't really the customer. There's all these new ways for them to make money, right? And really the best way for them to make money is to get access to large pools of taxpayer money, like over the top, right? So they work with like development banks. They work with basically governments to get access to all this taxpayer money. And they know that in order to get access to all that taxpayer money, because we have this kind of global banking elite, they have to, like, the instructions to signal this ultra left gay rainbow flag thing, that's kind of like coming down from on high. And these people are kind of yes men. They're true believers. They're really susceptible to wanting to believe in something anyway. So they just crank this stuff out, all day.
Yeah, I mean, all right, I'll give you an example of some woke washing that I was myself a part of.
Yeah.
So last summer, I did some freelance work for a PR company that worked with Pfizer.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So, Pfizer, like all these other corporations, are like, okay, people care about Juneteenth. And they care about us reaching out to people of color. So the agency I was working for was helmed by a Black woman, and Pfizer came along to her and said, "Hey, you're a Black woman. Here, do Black stuff. Help us do Black stuff. You're Black. You know what to do."
Yeah. Right. Yep.
So. And they gave that to her with they gave her the keys to the car to do social media content on diverse topics. So, I mean, the hilarious thing is she passed it on to me, a white guy, and this is hilarious, I did the Juneteenth post for Pfizer this year.
Yeah. Dude, I've been hired as a copywriter to write Black people's posts for Black History Month. Yeah. It's like we're living in this warped world where all the Black content is being written by white copywriters behind the scenes, which is hilarious. No, yeah, I see it all the time. I've gotten decks from clients, like mainstream clients, that have nothing to do with politics. Every single thing about the brand is a woke talking point. But that's how I know it's not an economic calculation. It's not that nobody is inside these companies controlling this thing saying, you know what, we need to go woke because it'll make us money. because it's not making anybody money. It doesn't not make the money either.
Well, I think they're scared of the ramifications of not being a part of it. They're scared of the implications that they could be on the Trump side of the equation, and they desperately don't. And so they want to go.
Why are they scared of that? Why would they be scared of that? Trump, it's a huge, like, watch what happens in this next election. Are they it's going to be DeSantis supporters. It's going to be whoever. The right side, this white working class, that is their biggest enemy. They hate them. They hate nationalists, right? They hate nationalists. They hate these white working class people. The reason why I would argue they hate them is because they're the biggest threat to inevitably pushing off economic reform. When white Christian people get together, first of all, as you said, they don't spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when they get together and they build and they have a cohesion, they are a massive threat to a global economy that can hire whoever it wants. It can break any union it wants. It can, it hires women. It gets to double its workforce on a global scale. Their biggest fear is like Christian white conservatives who are nationalists, because nationalism, what happened with Brexit, nationalism is a threat to their money. If they have to pay tariffs, they have to pay high tariffs to import stuff into the British economy, into the American economy. That costs them they can't hire Asian slaves. Maybe they have to hire people and actually pay them decent amounts of money, right?
Well, yeah, although I would argue that Trump's economic nationalism was mostly a lot of tax breaks that would convince employers to bring jobs back here. And well, of course, he did tariffs against China too, but it wasn't necessarily to bolster the fortunes of the everyday worker, I would argue.
Well, but then why did he do it? Why did he then do those tariffs?
Well, I think part of it is, the conception of national security. Like if you're so there's less of a dependence on foreign capital and trade.
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, all the microchips are made in Taiwan kind of thing. But I think that there's part of that, but surely those were good for the American worker, right? I mean, surely that pressure, you need to have walls. I mean, I think you need to have walls around your community in order to hope to have any sort of workers' rights at all, because then otherwise there's always going to be, if a corporation can access the absolute bottom of the labor market worldwide, then they just have slaves, more or less, which is what they have now. They're not actually slaves, but why are there nets on Foxconn, right? Because they can do whatever they want with these people. They can totally dominate them in every way. So what?
Well, I was just going to say, what we're starting to see now with the labor shortage is all of a sudden they're trying to raise the Social Security age and in some states lessen the laws on child labor.
Right. Well, and look what in France, they just raised the retirement age by 2 years because they want to do everything they can. And, again, I think this is, if you look at feminism, what's so incredible to me about feminism is, okay, fine. So women didn't, they were relegated to this role of female, the traditional female role for a long time. Then, the story goes, they didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to be in the workplace, right? And so we opened it up to allow them to do it. Even if we accept that, even if we accept that that's what happened instead of them, the powers that be just wanting to double their workforce overnight, even if we accept that it was women who made it happen, they asked for it, they wanted to do it. We have no theory, we have no study, we have no analysis of the economic consequences of doubling the workforce. No one talks about this. No one, there's no field of study that's saying, hey, was it maybe not a good thing to double the workforce overnight with this group that is not really experienced in the workforce? Like, why don't we ever talk about that?
Well, I think there are some people, maybe not in those terms, but uh, I think there's a growing awareness of the pressure on parents and about child raising in this age where both man and woman are expected to be in the workplace. And I think COVID offered a sort of a time of reflection about, you know, is this working?
Yeah.
because a lot of people would say that the work at home push partly is an attempt to address that.
Yeah. Is an attempt to make it a little better for women, more or less.
Yes, and men that are caretakers.
Right. No, I think that that's true, and I think there is this pressure that women are realizing. Well, wait a second. You know, I mean, Elizabeth Warren, right? She wrote a book on this. She wrote The Two Income Trap. So
Yeah.
she's certainly a proponent of at least having this discussion. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also a reason why they don't let her within, 100 yards of any real power, because they don't want to have that discussion,
Yeah, and well, you have I know like Andrew Yang uh has written a good amount about like the crisis of boys and men. I think he talks about it some. But yeah, there is this cultural fear to like, talk about feminism gone too far, or that, the marketization of family life has not been a good thing. I think there definitely is a reluctance to talk about those issues.
The marketization of family life is that's exactly kind of what I'm trying to articulate poorly. I'm articulating it poorly right now, but yeah, it's like it's let's make every relationship something we can buy. And I think if you look at their strategy, they're most intimidated by relationships they can't buy. Anything that is a something that doesn't have a market value, they don't like that. Okay, so
Yeah, and I think
sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, just to get back to the NFL, and I think that's part of what we're seeing with the NFL. And I mean, I know you disagree on these market calculations, but I feel like they are trying to monetize everything you get. They care about turning a profit, and they've been wildly profitable in the last few years, and that just keeps going up. And you have to ask yourself why that is.
Yeah, the NFL. Yeah, so why is their profit gone up? I really don't think the answer to it is that they've like gotten new fans. I don't think that they've like convinced the Brooklynites to love football.
Well,
I think they've done it because, again, these sources of revenue now. Revenue isn't like companies used to sell products to customers, right? That was it. Their job was to sell a widget to a buyer. Now their job is to diversify their revenue streams in all these crazy ways. They want subscribers, right? And they also want access to all this really cheap money that like development banks have to do some deal in Mexico, to do some deal in England, where they apply for some grant that gives them like huge access to massive amounts of global banking dollars, more or less. And where do those global banking dollars come from? They come from all kinds of government initiatives that fund these global banks. And what do you see? Google any global development bank. It's rainbow flags the whole way down. Everything is rainbow flags. So I don't know. It's kind of this party of Davos thing. It's like this, not to go Alex Jones on you, but it's like there's a
I just think it's a soft consensus. I don't think that it's a coordinated effort. I don't think that George Soros is back there, knighting people with woke values. I think it's just again, part of a function of the internet, which has rapidly changed culture, and you have this group of people in academia, media, and all of these knowledge jobs believing, the same thing. And so those people get into these positions and they all have this soft consensus.
Right. Yeah. I think that you're right that, I mean, George Soros is definitely behind the scenes doing a lot, right? I mean, he was the number one donor of the entire democratic process. But no, it's not like he's completely
and then Sam Bankman-Fried, but
right. And then he was number two. So but I think yes, I agree with you that it's not a shady cabal of George Soros and three other guys who are like,
that's anti-Semitic.
Yeah, right, exactly. So right. Okay, so that's a great. Let's finish up with so you wrote another article about another identity politics issue, which was a movie called Actors, which had this guy Peter Vack in it. I think it's not Dasha Nekrasova, but she's involved with these people somehow. It's like this cool New York.
She's filming something with them, like a future project with them, and I think she's in that crowd.
Yeah, it's all these same people in New York who have created this like slightly alternate economy, and they're all alternate art culture economy, and they're making movies. And one of these movies was called Actors, and it was premiering at in an indie theater called the Music Box in Chicago, which I grew up going to. And the Music Box canceled the screening because these people were being accused of being fascists, and the movie was accused of being fascist because it was sort of it's a depiction of a guy who becomes transgender in order to garner more attention as an actor. So I know that we don't have to get deep into the details of all of this, but what is your opinion generally of like the cancellation of art in these contexts?
Well, it's funny because we started out this conversation talking about the Reader, and in the past, this sort of transgressive type of art would be something that you would find in the Reader because it was part of the counterculture. And we're in this weird space where the new counterculture is this kind of thing, this scene that's doing this work that, they say isn't transphobic, but it kind of plays upon the way our culture prizes trans voices and things like that. So they're kind of, shining a sort of lens on that idea because, it's kind of meta because it's about somebody who is like a flailing actor and pretends to be trans to get attention. So it's kind of ironic, but in this sort of panicky environment, anything that isn't preaching just complete, pro trans, everybody are heroes, it gets banned or canceled, or at least accusations of transphobia or fascism.
Well, and what they don't like is the idea that being trans is an advantage. Like it seems like that's what they take the most issue with. They don't want the public to think that.
Well, I think part of it is that it somehow casts doubt on that anything that makes you consider that transphobia could be a performance, even though they're not actually saying that is seen as too far. That to fake it, like even to discuss it, is transphobic.
Not okay. Yeah, like because that undermines the idea that it's this totally incontrovertible thing, except when it is controvertible, which we don't even need to get into that. But what do you think we should? Yeah, so obviously canceling art is bad, right? Canceling art for being transgressive is ridiculous, especially from the left. But yet, why is this happening? Why does the Music Box? Why does every institution always seem to side with the canceller. Like, why? Who is in control? I think that's what's so bewildering is why did the bureaucrats, or not bureaucrats, whatever, the people who run the music box theater, why do they always make the decision on the side of the identity politics people?
Yeah, I mean, for some reason they're scared of social media mobs, and also the media. I mean, I tried to write a pretty impartial account, but they're scared of the media writing that, oh, this transphobic movie appeared at the music box, and suddenly, in their minds, they would get protested by trans people and seen as, not being a trans ally. So there's this sort of imagined fear of the bad publicity that happen. They don't want bad publicity, because there's not going to be like a lot of trans doubters that have voices in the mainstream media, so they're not really scared of them.
But say that, okay, so imagine that they were to publish or create a very pro-abortion movie, right? That was just like so pro-abortion that
wasn't that Jenny Slade movie kind of like that a few years ago?
Yeah, I don't know. What was that?
Obvious Child, something like that. How she was super cool with her abortions.
So say they were to make that movie.
Yeah.
No matter how much they got protested by the right, they wouldn't care. Yeah. They would view it as, oh, we're transgressive and cool, and this is the point of art, right? They would totally say that. So why is it that they are so completely susceptible to one and completely immune to the other?
Well, because in the city of Chicago, you have 92% blue voters that think a lot of the same lines, and we'll look at it the other way around. If you're in a suburban or like small town where there's a church playing a Passion of the Christ or some other Christian movie, there's sort of this alternative ecosystem of like Christian movies these days. And, if you had liberal protesters protesting at that, chances are they're not going to care about that. They're going to play the movie anyway. I think it's just, we live in these bubbles of liberal or conservative. And so it's just getting more ironclad.
Yeah, it's just that the entire establishment, like the people who are actually in power, always seem to side with the left. And it's like there's no, what happened with the Reader, what happened in every single place. It's like there's this endless march and it's unstoppable no matter what you do. And it's very weird.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, what do you have coming up? What's more for the Compact, or I know that you have a new job in Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm writing about democracy in Atlanta for the site called Atlanta Civic Circle, and it's such a broad topic, and so Fulton County and the Atlanta area has been a focus of both liberals and conservatives with the election systems. I actually wrote a piece for Compact a few months ago in November talking about Stacey Abrams, because Stacey Abrams also cast the Georgia electoral system in doubt for different reasons than Trump. But yeah, it's been a focal point in elections. In fact, it's still reverberating. There's this city that just voted to incorporate in the Atlanta area called Mableton, to create their own separate city inside the Atlanta city limits. And they haven't even established a city charter yet. And there's already people there saying the election was fake or rigged. Hey. And so there's just been a real trickle down effect of people doubting the elections here. Yeah. So I'm sort of covering the democracy beat. I might be writing a little bit about this Mableton election. And with Jimmy Carter on his deathbed, I'm writing a thing about Jimmy Carter.
Nice. Yeah,
so, a little bit of everything.
There's definitely something to the election. So, and do you think that that's coming from both sides now? Like both sides are now like the election's fake?
No, but what happened is it just switched, because in 2018 you had Stacey Abrams saying that the election was rigged in favor of Brian
Oh,
Kemp,
yeah.
and all these black voters are disenfranchised, and so that election was tainted, and Brian Kemp never really won. Well, 2 years later, it just reverses itself, and it's the Republicans
Yeah.
who, threw everything into contestation. Well, what are the trickle down effects of that? And that's sort of what I'm covering right now.
Sounds like a good beat.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. I mean, it's not, especially in where you are, which is such a fraught place. It's like they really care about Georgia for some reason. Like the
Atlanta,
powers that be really, really care about Georgia.
yeah, Atlanta has sort of become one of the centers of the political universe in the last few years.
Yeah.
I mean, with the Stacey Abrams thing, with the Warnock and Ossoff election, and then now the Democratic Party is talking about moving Georgia up to second in their primary slate. So that kind of shows you where the balance of power is going.
That's so true. Why do they care about Georgia so much? Why do they?
It's a good question.
I don't know either. It's just funny. Yeah, there's.
I think partly because it's seen as like a purple state because Atlanta has gone so blue in the last 10 years that and it's growing here. I mean, Georgia has a lot of people are leaving the lib state all of a sudden, since the pandemic. They're leaving New York, they're leaving California, they're leaving Illinois, and they're coming to states like Florida, Georgia, and Texas. So it's just, I mean, part of it is just growing in population and power.
Yeah.
But they think, the Democrats think that that they can win it and permanently turn it blue.
Right. And it's like it's like a target for them. Very cool. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being willing to being open-minded and talking to me and everything like that. So really appreciate it. And yeah.
Yeah, I usually talk to people that pretty much agree with me on most things. So it's cool to have a little debate.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you and I probably do agree on almost everything. It's just we're like a little bit, I probably agree with you on way more stuff than I agree with like a neocon, for example. Definitely more, So yeah, I think we're probably, kind of two sides of the same coin. I think I just, yeah, I don't know. I've just like gone.
You're racist.
Yeah, I'm just right. That's what it is. No, I get in trouble for not being racist enough, believe it or not. Yeah, no, I again, like, anyway, you can hear my thoughts on that on other podcasts. But okay, man, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, take care, Isaac.